Alrighty, hello and thank you for joining me for today's demo. My name is Hannah and I am the Director of Customer Success here at BigMarker. And we will be covering three distinct parts of the webinar hosting experience on BigMarker today. And what we'll be starting with is what you're seeing on the screen now, which is the channel. Now, your channel is essentially like a company account or organization account for your webinar hosting on BigMarker, and you can brand it with your own branding. You can make it customer facing, or you can keep it internal just as a storage space for your content. And as you can see here, all of my previously recorded and previously held and upcoming sessions are all going to be listed here in grid view, as well as my channel hosts. Now, the concept of channel hosts is unique on BigMarker. Instead of having completely separate environments for hosts, you have this kind of, like I said, company or shared account, and then you can have host licenses that can essentially create and schedule webinars on the account. Now, depending on the plan that you're on, you'll have a certain number of channel hosts that are included in your subscription, but you can always add more by clicking the Manage Co-host button here and adding them as needed. Now, each additional host license is going to be $19 per month per host, and again, you can add as many as you like. Now, in addition to being able to create webinars, host licenses also get their own designated meeting space, and you can host as many simultaneous webinars as you have host licenses. So in addition to channel hosts and being a storage space for your content, webinars are hosted by the channel, which means that they'll all automatically funnel here. Now, to actually set up a webinar on your account, you'll notice that there's a Create a Webinar button in the top right corner of pretty much any page that you're on when you're logged into BigMarker. And when you click this Create a Webinar button, that's going to kind of bring you to the next step of today's demo, which is actually setting up a webinar. So you'll notice that we have tons of different types of webinars here, and we'll go through each of these. But the first one that I always like to start with is the live webinar format, because this is kind of your catch-all. This is kind of the general webinar that most people are using to deliver live content. Now, the live webinar feature can be used for webinars, but it can also be used for meetings, classes, trainings. Really, any kind of live session will work for the live with the live webinar format. Now, the next type is an on-demand webinar, and this is simply just a recorded webinar or a recorded video that you're uploading to a landing page on BigMarker. Now, this is going to be a little bit more robust than just, say, putting a video on YouTube, for example, because you have the ability to still customize the landing page of the on-demand webinar, and you can also accept registrations and even sell tickets to your on-demand webinar. So it is still a passive, on-demand recording. People know they're viewing a recording, but you still have a bit more control than like just putting it on YouTube, for example. Now, the next two I'm going to group together, which are going to be automated and evergreen webinars. And the reason I'm covering these both at the same time is that they're actually exactly the same in what they do. The difference between these two is how they're scheduled. So for both automated and evergreen webinars, these are both going to be two types of automated webinars on BigMarker. And this means that you can actually pre-schedule all of these auto events to automatically happen in a live webinar environment. This is that more simulated live webinar that people want to use if they're delivering content at different times and they just kind of want to set it and forget it. So again, both of these are two different types of automated webinars, and the difference here is how they're scheduled. So traditional automated webinars are scheduled the same as live webinars are scheduled, in that they're individually scheduled, and you can schedule just like a one-off session, or you can schedule a grouping of these automated webinars called recurring, and so you're manually choosing each time that you want to offer. Now, if you'd prefer to do a bit more of a hands-off approach and instead put it on like a recurring automated cycle, you'll want to choose the evergreen option. And this allows you to do, for example, put it on a schedule. So every 2 hours from, Wednesday through Thursday, from the hours of 9 to 5, you want this webinar to automatically play. That's what an evergreen webinar will do. Now, we do have a couple more different types of webinars, and I really quickly want to cover those before we get into actually scheduling one. So The next is the live stream, and this is actually if you wanted to broadcast a live webinar to Facebook or YouTube Live. So by setting this up, you will be then live streaming it. You can't do like a live stream of an automated, but if you want to host like a screen sharing or webcam sharing, this would be completely possible with the live stream option. And then finally, we have the 24/7 webinar. And this is a type of webinar that is just an always open live webinar room. The only caveat is you cannot record in the 24/7 environment. So it is good for more informal sessions, kind of like drop-in hours or a quick meeting with an internal team, things like that, where you don't need to record. Finally, we have Webinar Series, which is not quite yet available, but this will allow you to offer a group of webinars for one single registration. So once you actually pick the type of webinar you want to create, you just simply click Create One. From there, you'll get the opportunity to give it a title, schedule it, based on the date and time or different times that you want to give it. Add an About section, choose the privacy settings, and then click Create. Now, once you actually create your webinar, you'll set up what's called a landing page on BigMarker. And this is the page where people come to register. It's also the page where people come to enter the webinar when it's live. And if you choose to record your webinar and you want to publish that recording so that people can view it on demand, you can actually publish the recording to play on this landing page as well. So this is a multi-purpose page, and the link won't change throughout the entire life cycle of the webinar. Now, this is a highly customizable landing page, and I've kind of set a really brief, kind of quick test session up here. I've really just added an image, but there's lots more that I can do to it. So to illustrate that, I'm going to refer to these 3 buttons at the top right corner of the screen. Now the first is Edit Page, and if I click that, it's going to allow me to do some live editing on the page. So for example, editing this banner image here at the top by clicking Edit Image, or changing the, for example, the button colors, or adding a logo in the top left corner, or perhaps adding an About section. Lots of different kind of live editing tools that I have access to. Now, in addition to the live editing on the page, I also have these 2 secondary buttons up top as well. The first is Change Template. Now, if I want to change my template on BigMarker, meaning the layout of the landing page, I have lots of different options at my fingertips. You can actually go through and preview all of these. We are continuously always adding more, but we have tons and tons that you can choose from now. And then you can always add your own images and branding to each of these. Now, the third and final button at the top right corner of your landing page is this Manage Webinar button. And the Manage Webinar button actually takes you to the back end of your webinar, which is where all of your kind of editing tools and management tools can be found. And this is broken down into 6 kind of distinct parts. The first section is Edit, which is where all of your true editing tools will be. If you wanted to modify any of the webinar details, such as the date and time, or perhaps the title, you can edit that here. In the presenter section, you can add new guest presenters just by clicking the Add New Presenter and filling out the details in the pop-up. Now, you can add as many guest presenters to your webinar. These are free to add. And of course, like I said, you can just save that and it will send an invitation to that person to be a presenter for your webinar. Also in this section, you can do things like sell tickets to your webinar. You can monetize both the live and the recorded version just by setting your ticket prices. You can also modify privacy settings for both the live and the recorded webinar, and enable things like dial-in and other advanced settings. Again, the Edit tab is where all of your true editing details will be, but the Design tab is actually more related to the aesthetics, the design of your webinar. Now, this is also going to be kind of a continuation on what we saw earlier with the template. You can also change your template here. But a really cool feature that I want to point out in this section is the ability to add your own logo and branding to the live webinar or live hosting experience. So instead of having the BigMarker be in the top left corner of your live webinar, you can actually click Change Logo and add your own logo, as well as adding a theme color to the top banner of your webinar. And you can choose from one of our stock colors, or you can click the plus sign to add your own hex code for your own color scheme. Finally, we have a webinar preview card, and this is the image that shows up in grid view on your channel if you are sharing your channel page. You can also choose a stock color, or excuse me, a stock image, or you can upload your own webinar image if you like. So we've covered edit and design. The next couple of sections are going to be more in the marketing and management space. The first being emails and invitations. For emails and invitations, you can set up and send really nice customized invitations to your webinar, in addition to also being able to send reminders and notifications. So to set up an invitation, it's really quite simple. You just click this new invitation button. Then from there, you can add your list, so your email list that you want to send it to, and you can also customize the content and the design of the email. Once you've edited that, you can actually send it or schedule it to be sent at a later time. Now, once people are registered for your webinar, they'll receive a series of notifications leading up to the webinar, as well as some follow-up emails after the webinar has been hosted. All of these emails can be managed. You'll notice you can edit them and delete them. You can add more if you like by clicking the blue button here up top saying add new emails. But by default, people who register for your webinar will receive a registration confirmation email letting them know that they've successfully registered, and 2 reminder emails leading up to the webinar as well. So a 24-hour reminder as well as a 30-minute reminder before the webinar goes live. So for all 3 of these emails, in all of them, they contain a really important personal login link that makes it just a one-click entry into the webinar. For this reason, I don't recommend deleting all of these emails because they do contain this really important link. But if you are interested in deleting these and sending your own, you'll just want to extract that list. And if you are interested in extracting that list, please email support@bigmarker.com and we can help you with that. Now, the post-webinar follow-ups that we also send are the recording publish notifications. So again, if you record your webinar and you want to publish it so people can view it for playback, you can also send them a notification email letting them know that the recording is now available. We also have a feedback survey, which is just an email asking people to rate your webinar from a star rating of 1 through 5, as well as a comment section as well. And finally, a general emails section as well for any post-webinar follow-up that you want to send your registrants or your attendees after the webinar. The next kind of management section, and you may have noticed that we actually landed here first, was the Manage Webinar tab. Now, this is considered your kind of home base when you visit your webinar, and that's because the dashboard is here. Now, you'll notice that there's lots of stuff going on here, so I am just going to kind of zero in on a few things. The first is the kind of dashboard here at the top. This is where all of your quick links will be. So if you wanted to share your webinar URL to allow people to, register or attend or even view the recording, this shareable link will do the trick. Also, we have things like the copy webinar button, which allows you to duplicate your webinar. A practice webinar section, which if you click that, it will allow you to generate a practice webinar environment for you and any guest presenters or anyone else you want to invite to be able to practice. And then also in the More tab, we have the ability to fully delete this webinar if you plan to, reschedule it or do something else, or the Embed Registration button as well. And we'll get more into the embeddables in just a moment, but also on this dashboard, I really quickly want to cover a few of these kind of big header topics. So the first is Evergreen SMS Relay. Now this is if you are hosting Evergreen webinars and you want to enable SMS, so text messages alerting you when people communicate with you, during your Evergreen webinar where you might not be there, and you can respond via text as well, so you can enable that here. And then below that, we have all of our webinar reports. Now on BigMarker, you'll notice that we have a few different reports, and actually you'll receive these automatically following your webinar. But if at any time you want to download these or just access this information, you can always check out your webinar reports on your dashboard of your webinar page. And from here, you'll see that we have an Excel file, a PDF file, just a breakdown of your registrant list only, and then also a live webinar transcript, which has all of the activity from the chat section, polls, and Q&As in one form, so you can reach out and follow up with people if you so choose. Now, on the left-hand side of this page, I just want to call out two more sections here. The first being preload. Now, the preload section is only for live webinars where you want to share content manually, but you'd like to preload it so that it's ready and waiting for you when you enter your webinar. You can preload pop-up offers, files and videos, so slides or video content, handouts, and also polls. And it's really simple to do. All you have to do is click preload on the type of content you want to share. And then, of course, upload the new files such as, slide deck, videos. You can do YouTube or MP4 or any of the other kind of preload options. Now, again, this preload option is only for live webinars. If you're opting to do like automated or evergreen webinars, we'll see how to do that in just a moment, but this is not the place to do that. The next section that I want to cover is the widget section. We have three different types, actually four if you count the recording, which is available post-webinar as well. Different widgets that you can embed into your site. So the first is the registration widget. Now we have two different types. We have a single registration or multi-registration widget. And from here, you can actually embed a registration form on your own website, and you can customize it as well. We have image only or form only, followed by images, background color, button length, all of that kind of stuff that you can customize. And once you have it looking and feeling the way you want it to, you just copy this embed code and embed it into your site. Now, the same is true for the live webinar widget. Now, the live webinar widget won't have a preview, but it's really just an iframe code that you can embed into your site, and then it will actually play the live webinar as it's happening live directly from your website. Now, there isn't any sort of two-way interaction, so if you are looking to, have your audience be able to download any handouts or interact in polls or anything like that, you'll want them to join the live webinar. But if you just want them to be able to view the webinar, you can certainly embed it onto your site and they would be able to follow along during the live webinar. Now, the next tab is automation, and what we were covering in the preload section and saying how it's not where you set up an evergreen or automated webinar, this is the section where you're going to want to do that. And for both automated and evergreen webinars, this is how you set them up. It's really straightforward, but I really quickly want to cover this as well. If you're not planning to host automated or evergreen webinars, you can ignore this section. It will not apply to you. So, on the webinar automation section, you'll just want to make sure that automation is on, and then you'll notice that you have this kind of preset timeline. 15 minutes before is the webinar start time, or 15 minutes before the webinar start time is when attendees can begin entering, and that's when you can begin adding events to your timeline. The next is the start time, so the actual scheduled start time that your webinar is scheduled to begin, as well as the actual end time of the webinar. And you'll notice that we have an exit URL section for here as well. This can be edited, so if you want to redirect to your own website, for example, you can certainly add that here by clicking the little pencil icon next to the end webinar section. Now, in between all of these events, you can do what's called adding a new auto event. And adding a new auto event will then obviously add an event to your timeline, so you can choose whether you want to play a video, send a chat message, post a poll, handout, or offer. And all of these, if you were to click on them, will have a drawer sliding out asking you the exact moment you want to trigger this piece of content. So, you could do like 5 seconds or, 6 minutes and 32 seconds after the webinar start, or whatever you want to send it, followed by the actual content that you're adding. So in this case, it would be a message. And then you can click Save here at the bottom. And that will just directly go into your timeline. And you can continue building on auto events until you've filled your automated or evergreen webinar to your liking. Now, if you've hosted an automated or evergreen webinar in the past and you want to import a previous webinar into your new session, you can do that by clicking the Import button here and selecting either from a previous webinar or even a CSV file. Now, if you're importing from a previous webinar, you can actually select the type of content you're looking to import from that previous webinar, as well as selecting the webinar that you want to choose, and then clicking Import, and it will just go right into your timeline of events, just as if you were adding the new auto events as shown previously. The final thing to note here is the chat tab. So a lot of times people will want to populate their automated or evergreen webinars with lots of chats to make it seem more of a realistic live experience. You can actually import chats from a previous webinar here as well, or you can just manually add new messages as well. And then all of these will just automatically play based on the time schedule that you sent, or set up, just like in the automation timeline that we just saw here. Now, the last two parts of the automation tab are the audience permissions, so what you want to allow your audience to do or not do, as well as the automation test. So if you want to play a test to see what your automated webinar will look like, you just click the play test button and it will generate a webinar based on your automations that you've set up. Now, the final tab here is the integrations tab, and this is going to be the tab where all of your direct integrations can be set up, along with the Zapier integration if you are opting to integrate with a tool that's not listed here. So again, all you have to do is click on the integration or the box that you want to integrate with, and you can certainly set that up here. And again, Zapier is a third-party tool that will allow you to integrate with tools that BigMarker does not directly integrate with. Now, for the third and final aspect of the demo, I wanted to cover the hosting experience. And what we'll look at is the webinar from both a attendee's perspective and also a host perspective as well, because I think both are really equally important. So I'm going to enter this webinar that I've already set up, and I'm going to be entering today's session as a host. So right off the bat, we are seeing something that our attendees will not see. As a host or as a guest presenter of the webinar, I have the ability to select my audio or webcam settings before I even enter the session. You'll see I have two different options. The first is telephone audio, which will allow me to dial in, or I can use my computer audio if I want to share a mic or a webcam directly from my computer. Now I can X out of this, and when I do, this is what the blank state of the webinar room will look like when I am the host of a webinar. So again, a few things that I'm seeing are not what my attendees will see. So to illustrate that, I've actually preloaded some content here, and I'm going to open it because I want to zoom in a bit and show you what your attendees will see. So the only two aspects of the webinar experience that your audience will see is whatever is sharing here on the presentation screen. Now that could mean, slides, it could mean screen sharing, it could mean video sharing, so again, YouTube or MP4, and of course also webcam sharing. And then to the right of that, we have the chat panel as well. Now you can certainly limit what people can and cannot do in the chat panel, whether it's turning on or off the public chat or Q&A or anything like that, but this is what they will see by default. What they will not see is the sharing toolbar here at the top right corner of the screen, where you can share your mic, your webcam, screen sharing, and then all of the content that you were able to preload will be ready and waiting here. And finally, we have the host control panel as well, which allows you to obviously control your webinars. Now, on the audience tab here, we have the audience permissions, so what people can and cannot do during the webinar. I do want to note that a few are auto-enabled and a few are auto-disabled by default. So the first three, if you don't touch any of your webinar settings beforehand, you'll see that you have Show Attendee List, Enable Public Chat, and Enable Q&A turned on. You can, of course, turn off any of these at any time, and you can also turn on at any time any of the ones that are auto-disabled, which would be Publish All Q&A, meaning that the attendees can see what the questions are being submitted in the Q&A section, and the ability for all attendees to be able to share a mic or a webcam. Now, obviously, these bottom two settings should be used sparingly, especially for webinars, because if I enable these, all of my attendees at any point in time would be able to share a mic or a webcam. Now, it's a great tool for meetings, but it's not so good for webinars when you're trying to deliver a more lecture-style presentation. So again, just proceed with caution. Finally, we have the individual permissions section where all of your admins of the webinar, presenters, so guest presenters, and also attendees will be listed out. Now, if you do want to allow certain attendees to be able to share a mic or a webcam during your webinar, you certainly can allow this without enabling all. All you have to do is find the attendee's name in the attendee list, just as my name is listed here, and click on the icons next to their name that will have some slash marks through them. This will enable the mic and webcam sharing for single attendees rather than giving everyone access. Now, the final few things that I want to note are the recording tab, which is where you can start and stop your recording. You can only start it and stop it once, so it's important to note that you should only be starting the webinar recording when you're ready and stopping it when you're ready to stop, rather than starting it early and needing to pause, because there's no pause functionality. And finally, the automation tab, which is where if you are hosting an automated or evergreen webinar, this is where you can actually follow along with the automations that are scheduled out. Because automated webinars are still technically live, you can still enter them and, for example, facilitate like a live Q&A or just moderating the chat or something like that while it's going on, but you certainly do not have to be there again. But again, that's pretty much all for today's session. Just to recap really quickly what we've covered the BigMarker channel, we've covered how to actually set up a webinar, and then also the hosting experience from a host and a attendee's perspective as well. Thank you so much for joining me for today's session, and happy hosting.